Hello, everyone. Welcome to Music Talk from McNally. I'm Mark. This is Eric. We're thrilled to be back here again at McNally here in Treaty 6 territory. A huge thanks to Rachel and all the staff here at McNally for having us again. We're here, I think, 6 more times this year or something crazy. This one felt really quick. Like we were just here
Very
2 weeks ago, and we see each other almost every day. So we've run out of things to say, actually. No. How are you, Eric?
There's always stuff to say.
How was you? We just finished our first concert, Postcards from Paris, which was an exceptional triumph. The live stream was fantastic. We were really thrilled how well that went. The concert film launches later this week. What was it like to make music again?
It was weird and fantastic. It was that strange moment where you came on first to talk to the audience, and then I came out and we started playing. And of course, we'd been rehearsing all week in that space, but to have an audience there to actually respond, even just that initial, you feel that energy, and then to start the piece and we're playing for someone was exciting. It really was, and it's also exciting to try a new space with different acoustics and all that. So it was exciting.
Yeah, it was a very cool experience. And it was really, like you say, it was electric in the room with an audience again. We had been there all week, and it was really cool to feel what it was like to have an audience again, even though they were all spaced apart and distant. And I don't know about you, normally we get to mix and mingle with people, but we didn't get to, and we don't get to this year.
No, exactly. And that was a strange thing after the concert even though we go back into the performing space, everyone is being ushered out. And so you kind of hopefully wave to someone who you might recognize behind a mask, because we're all masks. But yeah, you're right. There's not that communal, just chatting about life and that sort of thing. But still that you could feel that energy with the people there.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I know the team behind the scenes. I get to sit over at the command center and watch you from a completely different vantage point than usual. And at the command center, it was pretty cool to see all the comments pouring in from the live stream. There was hundreds of people watching live in the moment, but then over like 1,100 people saw it in that 24 hours.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. And so it was great to I think Megan or someone sent us the stats later or the next day, and then you watch that and you go, wow, this had way more impact than you even think. Of course, in the audience, they were thrilled. You could just tell when you said welcome, and they were thrilled. But to have that online presence as well was wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and it was also really cool. I've seen a couple of clips from the Postcards from Paris concert film that launches to our digital concert stream subscribers later this week. It's spectacular. It's just taking us longer than we thought it would, simply because the size of the files are so massive, and so it's been pretty cool to see what that will look like now that we're completely reimagining how concerts are. We talked about this at one of the rehearsals, about the fact that we're so used to our medium as an experienced live concert medium, that we all grew up. You go to the concert, you sit down, you open your program, the orchestra plays, you have intermission, you go back. It's a completely different medium, not only for the programming, but now because of the concert film, where we've spliced in interviews with you, with some of the musicians, with behind the scenes stuff. It's completely different.
It is. It's a whole experience, and of course, the experience live music is wonderful enough. But to have this, to see it again a week later or whenever. And to, like you said, the interviews, the behind the scenes, you get more into it, and you can rewatch it, and you can say, oh, I love that moment when the flute does this, or when they have a duet here, let's hear that again. And what is that understanding of what that person said? That connects with this. So there's even a deeper way of getting into it.
Big time, and actually a deeper way, like you say, of getting into the music. I'm at the control center. I'm the one going, okay, now we have to focus on the oboe. Now we have to focus on Jim, trying to make sure that people get to see what they're hearing And even watching it after the fact was really cool for me, because all of a sudden, we'll zoom in on Richard, and all of a sudden you hear his part in a completely different way than you would just sitting and hearing the full picture.
Exactly, and a great example of that is when you go to a concert, say, and it's a big hall, maybe it's in a different city, you don't know the seating, and it might be a new piece, and you don't know. All of a sudden, you hear like a viola solo, but you can't see the viola, and you're like, "Whoa, hold! There's a viola," but you can't see that necessarily. But online with a streaming, with you and Simeon and doing those close-ups is wonderful, because that brings a whole new life to it.
Yeah. It's a very cool experience. So we're going to talk about our concert this weekend. For anyone who's watching at home, you can join in the conversation. We've got someone monitoring the chat who sends the questions right to us. So you can go right into the chat function and ask all your questions. We'll do questions at the end of the night.
And we love questions, so
we do.
Send them this way.
We do. Paris of the Prairies, a perfect compliment, actually, in a way, if I do say so myself, being that we programmed this together. But it is a perfect compliment, because Saskatoon is often called Paris of the Prairies for good reason. We've got a beautiful river with that beautiful bridges across it, much like Paris, and we've got some Paris connections on the concert that we'll get to in a bit. Almost all of the composers have prairie ties. We're going to start with the one who doesn't have prairie ties, just because we can, and that's Marian Mozenich. This piece, though, was kind of crucial. We wanted something about the sky, and this one fit.
Exactly. It's we're playing one movement from Postcards from the Sky, so it actually fits our other themes as well of postcards, and it's the music. It starts off, though. I have to get into how Mozenich writes his music and what he is. So he's a Toronto composer, but has lived in Kingston for many years, and he has this wonderful way of producing or writing new music that is so accessible but emotional, and uses all these different techniques in a beautiful way. So he's one who started off composing a bit more avant-garde, but it takes those elements in an emotional and accessible way, so that you have this music, and it's not just the unfolding sky that we're playing or his other works, but it's throughout his oeuvre, throughout his catalog. You have the you want to listen to more. It's just this tie-in, and it's exactly the same thing with this piece, where it starts off beautifully with the shimmering. Rhythm is always there, and actually this is a theme throughout the whole concert. But rhythm is there, a 16th it's a string piece, in the seconds, and all of a sudden you have this solo cello coming out of nowhere, just this pianissimo, and it builds and builds and builds, and then it just dies away, and you're left feeling the gorgeous prairie sky. And even though he didn't necessarily write it intentionally for the prairies, we all know that this is the land of the skies.
We do have the best skies.
And it is incredible, and he captures that in a beautiful way.
Yeah, it's there is an elegance to his writing. A lot of those composers who write in that style, the sparseness, it's not quite paired. It's not that complex, but there's such an elegance to Mozenich's compositional style. We got to play the year before you got here, actually. We played Affairs of the Heart with Carrie DeWorse, and I hope to bring that back to stage soon, actually, because it's such a phenomenal piece of music. He just has such a charm to his music,
and people cling on to it right away. Like they grasp it and are moved by it immediately, and there's something very obviously compelling about that, but I was going to say respectful of that, like to be able to hit people's emotions that quickly is remarkable.
It is. there's two pieces for string orchestra on this program. The first is the Mozenich. The later in the show we get to do a piece by Jocelyn Morlock, who is indeed a prairie girl, from Manitoba, and we've played Solace before. It's important to bring back because it's such an incredible piece of music. It was loved by the audience and the orchestra when we played it I guess that was your first year. Yeah. So it's been a while, and it captures. What does it capture about the Prairies for you, this particular?
So Jocelyn's writing can be very sparse, and she uses this technique where someone quoted her as saying it's airy but deep or something like that. So there is this level of ambiguity. You're not really sure where it's going. There are these gorgeous colors, and then all of a sudden out of that you have this tremendous, very accessible melodies. And so I use that word with Marin's piece, Mosetich's piece. With Jocelyn, what she has planned, or what the piece entails, is two soloists, the birds, basically, a violin and a solo cello, and then you have these early music, other string players. And what it is, she means early music is no vibrato and simply long-held notes, that there's not really a key until all of a sudden we get to an F sharp major chord or to a B major chord. And on top of this are these solo interjections. And there's questions. Sometimes we resolve them, sometimes we don't. And amongst all of this are these harmonic strings, two or three to a part that bring it this, like I said earlier, a bit of an airy feeling where we're not grounded, but then, ironically, the soloists, who are birds, ground us.
Yeah, and with Jocelyn's music, I remember actually here at McNally Robinson saying this, and when I said it, it's stuck in my brain. We know she's taking us on a journey, but she's not going to tell us where we're going.
That's just it. And I think when she writes it, she's not even sure where she's going.
I agree. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing because she's discovering herself. And then in that process, when we play it, even if we're rehearsing a lot, we're still discovering all the time. And you talked about the Prairie connection. She's from Winnipeg, did her undergrad in Brandon. And although she's lived in Vancouver for many years, she has that Prairie feel and that sensibility of this expansiveness to her music.
Yeah, and the expressness. There's not a note wasted, which I always I click with that with Jocelyn. Growing up on a farm, you can't waste anything, and so she has that expressness to her sound and to her work. Yeah. So it's really thrilling to be able to do some of her stuff again. And then, so I'm going to do the Adascan. We're thrilled to be able to perform the nonette, rondino for 9 instruments. Not a traditional nonette, because we have 2 violins and no bass, which is unusual. Usually a nonette is violin, viola, cello, bass, and the 5 winds. So a bit strange. Murray Adascan, of course, although not a Prairie-born composer, inexplicably forever linked with the Prairies, particularly here in Saskatoon. He was brought here, I think, in the early 50s and stayed until the mid 60s, and then remained as the he was the head of the music department at the university, and he remained as the composer in residence until the 70s, which I think was the first of its kind, that position. He was also our music director for 4 years, from 1957 to 1961. It's got to be kind of neat, actually, for you to be able to be involved in the performance of a piece that was written by a previous music director.
It's really thrilling. I knew, of course, that Adascan was a music director here, but to read it again, it was last week or something, and I smiled again because here was one of the former music directors, and to play that piece is really exciting. And of course, growing up, when you do the conservatories pieces every year and all that, Adascan's music because it's interspersed with our upbringing. But to rediscover some of these works, and it's from '65, which is a really pivotal point in Canadian music and Canadian composition, because I wasn't born then, but at that point in Canadian music history, we're getting away from the European stronghold of what had that hold on us. Of course, they were influenced by them, but it's interesting that three of the composers we have on this program all studied with the same person, John Weinsweich in Toronto, who was actually, despite his name, was born in Toronto and raised in Toronto. And so there's a really neat connection. And Adaskin's works have this rhythmic quality to all of them, where that language of that time was modern, let's just say that, but more kind of like the paintings of the time, a bit abstract, but there was a theme through it. And Adaskin's theme is often the rhythm, where syncopation. And yes, the harmonic language is a bit more less tonal than other works, but there's a strong rhythm throughout it all. And the way he uses the different sections of the orchestra, there's a lot of string writing, and then he'll use the winds with the all the winds there with the horn and the others, and how they play off each other with once in a while a horn having a solo and then bassoon duet. There's a really interesting, a very fine example of that era of Canadian composing.
Yeah, and his, I mean, this piece packs a wallop because it's only about 5 minutes long, and it has everything in it. And like you say, it's not necessarily, it's not as tonal as some of the other works on the program. It's not either. It doesn't abandon tonality altogether. His and you can hear in it. I mean, you can hear in it the fact that he worked as a chamber musician himself, and that he worked with chamber musicians all the time, which is you can tell that he actually cared about his craft in that way.
Exactly. And you mentioned it's not atonal and it's not necessarily tonal, but the emotion is there, and that's what I've always loved about atonal or serial music, is that Schoenberg and others, their intention was always emotional. There's a deep grasp of it, and sometimes when you leave the harmony out, or an intentional harmony, you can actually get to the emotion faster. That's what I've always loved about Schoenberg and Berg and Webern. But then when other composers take that concept, develop in their own ways, like Adaskin did and others, there's an emotional depth to it.
And I think the other thing that I really like about this is one of two pieces on the program this weekend that would be considered chamber music. And for us, I mean, we were geeking out about this a couple of weeks ago, because for years we've been talking, wow, would it be possible to do on a Master Series concert a chamber music piece? And the answer for us for the last few years has been no, simply because of the acoustics in TCU Place. So this year, we have the opportunity to. I suspect it probably won't be the last time we fool around with this, but it's neat because it's a texture change from what you're listening to in the rest of the concert. What is it like from as you're standing at the helm of all of this to have the opportunity to play with sound in this way, because it is so different. We have string orchestra, we have chamber music, and then we have an orchestral piece.
Right. There's a intimate immediacy to it, so that when I'm standing up there and let's say conducting the nonette, I'm not trying to pull together 85 people. It's a very intimate thing of, let's see what we can do here with this small duet, or let's maybe soften this attack because the bassoon can come out better. So there's these small details that are very individualistic, obviously one to a part, and you can really dive into that in like I said, a more intimate way.
Yeah. This concert features two pieces that were written for the SSO. Now the nonette was technically first rehearsed here in Saskatoon, although given its first premiere in Toronto with the Toronto Symphony. But these other two pieces were actually written for us, commissioned for us. The first of which is $5 a Head by Chris Dirksen. Chris is one of the most awesome humans you would ever meet. She came out here in 2018 to workshop this piece with our wind quintet, and it was part of a cross Canada wind quintet explosion, if you will. There were 5 different emerging composers who were working with 5 different wind quintets across the country, and then these 5 wind quintets played each other's wind quintets. That's the most I've ever said wind quintet. Anyway, so this piece was so wonderful. Chris is from northern Alberta. She is Indigenous Mennonite background and an exceptional cellist. Does everything from Bach cello suites to touring with Kanye. She is super cool to work with. She did, when she was here for those workshops, she did a lot of outreach stuff with kids in schools and a lot of different groups here in town. She is a remarkable person. This particular piece is intriguing because it focuses around music being created around a soundscape. So the soundscape itself is from archival recording of the CBC and the National Film Board on the day that the very last treaty was signed. And it's a big statement from Chris, frankly. And it was for us in our organization and for the musicians involved and the staff involved, it was a remarkable opportunity to sit and ponder truth. For musicians who got to work with her and staff, we were sitting there for the first time really understanding what it meant to be treaty people, really understanding what the treaty signing, the significance thereof, the language that was chosen at the time. It was a big wake-up call for us in our organization to start addressing truth and the fact that we had even within our organization, we have been committed to working on truth and reconciliation, but it was a real moment. And Chris could have chosen to make it a very dark piece of music, but there's a lot of light. It as well is intensely rhythmic, and it's got a lot of power and hope.
Power is a right word. It was sitting at the concert. 2018, with Minstrel 5, the one-wind quintet, playing it with those recordings, and then the music that she wrote, incredibly powerful. It sinks you to your seat, nails you to your seat, and at the same time, like you say, there's light within that. So there's this beautiful, very, very powerful connection to the truth and reconciliation that we are hopefully all trying to experience, and there are the different layers within this piece, and so that's what Chris, just from who she is, there are these different layers, and I love that comes out in her music, the way she also speaks, the way she connects with people. It's a beautiful thing to see and to listen to, and so I'm so glad we have this piece within this prairie landscape that we're presenting.
Yeah, and it needs to be heard more, because it's a phenomenal piece of music, and it's a phenomenal piece of learning actually for all of us. As settlers here on Treaty 6 territory, and not just Treaty 6, all of the treaty territories, the understanding of what that does mean. And like you say, Chris is such an exceptional storyteller. She makes everyone feel comfortable, and she makes everyone feel like they have a role to play in this, and I think that was what was so important about being able to put it on this program. I mean, yes, we like to bandy about Paris of the Prairies for Saskatoon, but the reality is, I mean, this is not a new gathering place, and so being able to put this piece on the program was really important to us, and hopefully, if all goes well, and next summer happens. It's COVID. Who knows? I mean, frankly, day to day, who knows? We're looking at bringing her orchestral powwow here next year, which is really exciting, and I think one of the unique projects that we're going to be able to achieve next year. The major piece on the program, or the longest anyway, was also written for us in the early 1960s. ahead of the opening of the Mendel Art Gallery. And actually, Murray Adaskin and, of course, David Kaplan were involved in this project. The Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra commissioned Harry Summers to write a piece of music to commemorate the opening of the Mendel Art Gallery that connected music and art, and the result of which is the Picasso Suite. Before we talk about the piece itself, Harry Summers is referred to as the darling of Canadian music.
He is, and for various reasons. First of all, he wrote so much music, and in many different styles. But I think the darling thing you're referring to is people said he was a very good-looking man.
He was dashing. Actually.
Dashing.
Yeah, the Canadian Music Centre refers to him as dashing.
And you see his pictures, and you're like, yeah,
he
was very dashing.
Not every Canadian composer can claim that credit. So
that's true. But Summers, I was going to call him Harry. Summers, he didn't live too long. He was about 74. He died too young. But the amount of music and the type of music he wrote, he is a composer's composer in that he wrote. This is what he did. So if he needed to write, if someone, CBC said, hey, we need some music for this television program. Okay, I'll write that. The school where I'm working, needs a piece. Okay, I'll write that. We commissioned this symphony. Okay, I'll write this. And so he even referred to the 3 levels of composing. With the one was, community or music for use and this is a big Hindemith thing, the German composer, where he would write music that was going to be used, and so Harry or Summers used this as well. Where, like I said, if a school needs it, if someone else needs it, he'll write that music. Then the other type was theatrical and music for a certain element, like theater or opera or television, where it was used with another art form to be written. And then the third, of course, was music for music's sake. So if he had an idea, he would experiment here. And Summers, it's just so natural to say Harry.
He was dashing.
Summers had this beautiful thing. We talked about Mozenich and Adaskin of using different techniques that they had learned from their teachers. And by the way, both Adaskin and Summers both also studied with Mio in Paris for a little bit. So there's all this connection. But Summers had this great way of using these techniques to whatever was the need at the time. So if it was for this theater, or Louis Riel, for instance, for his opera, or for this piece, he used the different techniques. And I want to dive into, we'll talk about that, the different techniques he used for each movement of this piece.
Well, and I think that's what's so phenomenal about the Picasso Suite, and I think that's one of the reasons why it is one of the most played Canadian pieces of orchestral music, is because on top of going on this journey of Picasso's life, we go on a journey with Harry Summers' compositional abilities. He runs the gamut from jazz to avant-garde to neoclassical to romantic. Like if Harry Summers could pack in everything he learned up until this point in his life, he did. And it's 9 movements, mm-hmm. 9 movements, each exploring a different period of Picasso's life or Picasso's artistic style. We open Paris 1900, and it opens with one of the, I think this is my favorite opening moment of any piece all year, with the trombone slide.
You're right. It's a 2-beat trombone slide up into a brass ragtime, basically, and the other instruments join later on. But it's a ragtime. We've got a ragtime piano in there, and you're immediately transported to Paris 1900. And it comes back, it ends the whole, it's the 9th movement as well, much or a shorter version. All the movements are not that long. But it kicks you right into gear. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you that. It's and it's not the Paris like we had last week, which was, I mean, the same era, but this is like the working man's Paris. This is not the concert halls of Paris. This is what you'd hear going out to a club for drinks. Yeah. We then go into the blue period. And how does Summers give us the blue period?
Well, it's a trio, so it's just oboe, clarinet, and violin solo. And it's intertwined, moving in and out of these soloists. Or, yeah, they're soloists. It's a trio, but all of a sudden the oboe will have a different dynamic and come out, and the other two will drop away. And all of a sudden the violin will do the same. And within it, you have these highs and lows. And so it's this very fitting of the Blue Period. Of course, Summers was excellent at portraying a picture, very much like Richard Strauss in terms of his operas, where if you wanted to hear a beer fall off the table, Strauss could write that. Yeah, and Summers had this beautiful way of doing it with the Blue Period. And then with the Cubism that came after that, where it is these chunks. We have the piano in this form.
Just jumping ahead. It's just jumping ahead.
Sorry.
We'll get to Cubism.
Go ahead.
Okay, circus is the third movement, which is the Pink Period, and it feels like a circus.
It does, and it's it starts with a snare roll, and then we have the trumpet is the main player in this. But it's a circuit.
Bit of a fiendishly difficult trumpet part. Like it's tricky.
That's right, and it's also there's time signature changes, and so we're always a little bit off balance. We're not sure. Oh, is this where the beat? And there's a lot of syncopation. So it's like a circus where there are balls in the air. There might be someone on a horseback or something, and we're not sure if we're going to fall or not. And the strings finally at the end take it over. But the trumpet is kind of the main, not gesture, but the main performer of this movement.
Yeah, the clown. Then we have Cubism. Yeah. So Cubism, what I love about how Summers starts this movement is he builds a box in the piano. These chord structures that are not tonal and sound like a painting of Picasso's Cubism era.
Exactly. And we were talking about this before of emotion of not necessarily tonal music. And this is a great example where there are these chords. It's not this flowery music. It's a chord, chord, chord. And of course, it's not rhythmically right on the beat. There are some offbeat chords. Then he has the winds do it, the brass do it, the strings do it, and there's combinations of it as well. But there are these chunks of pieces along the way that are so beautiful. It's exactly what it is.
And make up a painting.
Yes.
It's incredibly cool. The next is the Neoclassical, which, true to its name, is the Neoclassical, and it does capture if the Cubism period in the music captures Picasso's Cubist adventures, the Neoclassical movement really does capture the return to an elegance, a sense of line.
And it's he was inspired, of course, by Stravinsky, who was one of the main neoclassicists of the 20th century, and this is very akin to the piece that we played last year, the Puccinella Suite, where you have individual groups or even individual players playing their lines, and the always with rhythm. And this is the thing where Stravinsky did it. You take a piece from the past, and you have that element, but with modern techniques. And this is very the same throughout the first part, and then at the end, or the second half, let's say, he goes into a 6/8 dance, which is very common in Stravinsky's music and the Puccinella and some of the other neoclassical works, Firebird and many others, where you have this beautiful dance-like melodies, but there's always a bit of an accent on each beat, and it's this classical dance.
It is. It's absolutely charming, and it's such a tonic for the movements before it. Yeah. Then we go into the Vollard suite. So 2 weeks ago, when we were rehearsing for Paris of the postcards from Paris, there's too many Parises. We move. We travel next in our adventures, so we leave Paris. So at rehearsal, one of the nights, our phenomenal principal flute player who treated us all to a lesson in line and color with her Debussy a couple weeks ago, came up to me and said, I was looking at the Picasso music, and she's like, I got to the Vollard, and I was thinking, boy, this is like a flute solo. And then she said, I listened to it, and It is a flute solo. It's just for flute. Now, the Villard sketches, if I'm not mistaken, were named after their owner. And
the
they're
commissioner, yeah.
and he died like right after they were finished, if I recall. And they are a lot of the sketches about a minotaur, which is fascinating. How tell me about that movement.
Well, so Picasso took quite a long time painting the Villard, or sketching, because it's etchings and a lot of that, and there's about over 100 parts of the whole commission. And he Villard actually commissioned Gauguin before to do a similar thing, but he didn't like Gauguin's, but he did like Picasso's before he died. But what it is with the Minotaur you mentioned is, in the early sketches or etchings, he starts off as a lover. And then all of a sudden, this Minotaur becomes abusive, and at the end, kind of a blind, deflated
shell, a shell of himself.
Exactly. And so what Summers does with this is the flute. The flute might not necessarily be in the Minotaur, because there's other elements to the whole etchings, but because they're also Villard is also represented in this whole series. But it's this extreme. It is just flute, so it's like a massive flute cadenza, and it covers the gamut of every emotion, every dynamic, every rhythm, and it's this you go on a journey from beginning to end, and you're not really sure where you are, and I'm very excited to see where Allison takes it. Yeah, it's very detailed, of course. All the dynamics are there, and all the rhythms are there, but like any cadenza, like any solo work, there's such an interpretation, or such an element of individual interpretation depending on the performer. And
it's become such an iconic flute solo for Canadian flute players. It's such a great work. Next is the Etching, the full name has escaped me.
It's the Faun.
Oh, it's the Faun next.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Haven't evidently.
There's 9 to remember.
I know.
There's a lot.
I almost got there. So the Faun is next. Is that Arcadia?
That's Arcadia.
Arcadia, which is so beautiful.
Yeah.
People need to listen for the duet that happens between the Glockenspiel,
yes,
and the
Celeste. Yeah.
Because it's enchanting.
Well, and this is, so he based this on a Spanish folk tune, and Picasso at the time was, I think it was for, I forget what gallery, but he presented these works, and they were not, you know how Picasso can be a lot of different emotions, and some of them are with a lot of deep meaning, or not so, they can be facetious, they can be all this, but this is simply childlike beauty. And so this is what Summers did. He used Spanish, which is, of course, very fitting for Picasso, Spanish folk tune that starts off with the Glockenspiel. The flute gets it, the celeste gets it, and the strings get it. And there's a beautiful, it's a waltz, basically. That's all it is. And not all, but it's a beautiful waltz that ends with that duet at the end there.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Then the Etching, or sketch. I don't know. You're the one who has to conduct it, so
I'm getting confused.
I just have to show up. Frankly, folks, I don't even really.
No,
there's another piece between the Villard and Arcadia. I'm sure
there is.
You know what? You keep talking. I've got it right here on my phone. So,
what are we forgetting? What period?
The Temple.
Oh, the Temple of the Mural of Peace, of course. And this is a so as the name suggests, mural of peace. It's a more subdued movement. A lot of the movements are lento. Lento means very, very slow, and
then the ones that aren't lento at all.
That's right.
The fast,
yeah, exactly. There's very
contrasts,
big contrast.
Like painting.
Yeah, and this mural of peace, it's almost Copland-esque in a way. And Copland, the great American composer Aaron Copland, there's a sort of a distance, a reckoning of humankind. That's maybe putting too much emphasis on it.
That's a lot.
On a 2 or 3 minute movement, but there's a sense of stepping back and just letting it be. which is beautiful. And this is in contrast to, you have the volare before and all these other movements, and it's almost shocking in almost like, oh, we've got another style, of all these movements, and here yet is another element of it. So it's a beautiful difference within all these other movements.
It ends as it began back in Paris with the codetta that is a romp. It has one of the most fantastic endings of any piece of music I've ever heard in my life, frankly. It packs a wallop for being 20-ish minutes long, and exploring the life of one of the most influential artists in all art. Like him or hate him, I mean, Picasso's impact on the 20th century and the 21st century, frankly, has been phenomenal. What I love about this piece is that in 1964, the SSO premiered it. We have the original score. We're going to have some photos of it coming up on our social media over the next few days. We're going to have it on display on Saturday, pardon me. We're not going to be able to have you touch it, of course, but we'll have it on display. It is one of the most immaculate scores I've ever seen in my life. Like, that man put so much time and effort into that score. But what I love about it is that Summers chose in 1964 to commemorate the Mendel Art Gallery opening with Picasso, and now here in Saskatoon with the phenomenal Ramey Modern, we have that incredible Picasso collection thanks to the Frank and Ellen Ramey Foundation. It's such a cool foreshadowing.
Exactly, it's such a beautiful connection and full circle of how, like we talked about this years ago, of hold on, the Ramey opened with all of the Picassos, and here we are, how many years later, doing this piece in the same city that it was commissioned, and such a strong, of course, Summers has a strong connection to this area. That, I don't know, it's a beautiful, beautiful connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a really unique opportunity to collide new with old, and yet the music doesn't feel like it's aged 60 years. Honestly,
no, it just brings a smile to my face.
It's such a phenomenal piece. So we're gonna open the floor to questions. So I know people have probably been sending questions in, and so we'll start getting questions in now. How are you? This is a busy schedule. What the folks at home don't know is that this year. Earlier today, we reprogrammed the next concert. The challenges that face an orchestra during the pandemic are unique. So our next concert in 2 weeks' time is Oktoberfest, a night at Oktoberfest. It's a pops concert. It's a heck of a lot of fun. We're featuring the brass ensemble because how could you not? When you need oompa music, you need the oom and the pa. But we'd order music from Leipzig. I don't know where that music is. So earlier today we had to reprogram. How are you coping with the speed of things?
Well, it's just like the times. You just kind of, oh, okay, here we go. We're doing something else, and luckily we have in today's world we have a lot of resources at hand that we can dive into, and there's always at the back of my mind, and of course in yours as well. I have a document that has backup plans, and they're right there. And even last week when you mentioned that, oh, this is taking a bit of time, I already had a few options going. So, but yeah, it's always going, oh, okay, hold on here. Let's try this, and then try this, and try this. And of course it changes. But I'm excited to say that we've got some great music lined up for.
And actually, in true us fashion, I actually sort of like what we've got lined up maybe better than the original
because it's fresh in our minds.
Yeah, it's like
that's kind of cool.
I know this year is quite unique for us because we usually program a year or more in advance. Now we're really truly doing it on the fly, literally, and it's kind of fun.
It is, and there's always new elements that we bring to it, and it's exciting in that kind of like, whoa, here we go, we got to get this happening right now.
It is the weirdest choose your own adventure book I've ever read, frankly, this season. One of the questions that has come in: is there a quintessential Prairie sound?
Oh, that's so hard to say. I don't think there's necessarily individual sound because it depends on the person, of course, composing, and also the time and era. But what I will say is that the Prairies definitely influences everyone, not just composers, obviously, but when you live here or you just even visit here, there's a different feeling. And you get that essence. You, of course, get it in the skies, but you get it also in the people, the landscape. And that, you can tell, influences the music of anyone who's written about the Prairies or has spent time here and simply written music. You can, at least I think I get a sense that they can sense it in their writing.
Yeah. I went a completely different direction and went literally a sound. And for me, the quintessential prairie sound is a meadowlark. Because what I absolutely love, growing up on the farm in the grasslands, meadowlarks are you can't remove them from prairie life. But what I love about a meadowlark, you can be driving down a highway at 100 kilometers an hour and you can hear a meadowlark. It's just like if that isn't some kind of crazy prairie stalwartness, I don't know what is. So our next question: what is it like performing works of living composers, and are they ever involved? So this is not the first concert we've done of an all Canadian program. We've gotten a reputation, Eric, amongst the other orchestras in Canada. We keep doing all Canadian programs, and people are like, "How do you do that?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's just great music.
Do it.
It's not that hard." Everybody on this program except one, Harry Summers, has left us, but everyone else is alive and well.
Well, Daskin is
Marie Daskin, pardon me. 2002. Yeah. I knew that too. But everyone else is alive and well, and it was so cool reaching out to some of these folks to say we're going to be performing your music. What is it like? I mean, none of them are here this time, right, which sucks. Oftentimes, composers will travel and be with the orchestra when you're performing. What is it like to be able to do this with living composers?
Oh, it's always exciting. It's always exciting. There's the sense of is not only the practical things of if you have a question, you go and ask the composer, you send them an email, or talk to them on the phone. But it's more. There is someone living. And you've got this music here, and you bring it to life again if it has been performed before. So there, that connection, and there's also that a little bit of anticipation. Ooh, how is the composer going to like this, or are they going to feel connected in a certain way to our performance? And that is something obviously we can't get with dead composers. And so there's also something that I had this feeling when I was in university. I just loved going into the stacks of the music library where there's all these Canadian composers, and it was like I was in this treasure cave, this cave full of treasures where, what? And maybe it had only been taken out 2 or 3 times, but you're like, I can put my stamp on this. And I loved choosing pieces where there was, back then, you couldn't send an email, but you could write the person or you could give them a call if there's a number. But often you couldn't even. Maybe they're in Vancouver and I was in Ontario. And you had a sense of, I might be interpreting this for the first or maybe second or fourth time. And there was something very, very exciting about that because I got to choose it. It wasn't layers and layers of Beethoven performance, which of course love Beethoven, but there you could kind of take that all away, and here was this new work. There was no recordings, usually, and you got to interpret it, or you got to think, what did he or she mean by this mark or by this mark? And there's something very, very thrilling about that.
There's such an immediacy to living composers' music. What I personally, and we've talked about this a lot before, is that these composers are writing this music for us, for this current living, breathing, alive, growing, changing audience. Tchaikovsky wrote his music for a very particular audience. Mozart wrote his music for a very particular, Haydn even more so, for a handful of people. But these composers are writing music in a world where we can't live without our cell phones and where email is the only way we get to communicate. And it's going to be really fascinating to see what comes a year or two from now, from this period of the pandemic, with particularly, like, I think of artists like Jocelyn Morlock, like Chris Dirksen, who are such creative beings that I can only see this having such a profound impact on what's to come of their output.
Massive impact, and also because of perhaps more people had more time during this to explore with the creativity. I think we're already seeing it, but we're going to have an explosion of new works, and which is very exciting for performers because of the composers that we love, and also new composers that we might not know. And there are some composers that we programmed this year that I'm sad that we don't get to perform their works, because it was people that we hadn't known before, and I was so thrilled to get to know them. But I can't wait to see what happens with these composers during this time, and like you said, in the next year or two.
Yeah. It was funny when we did end up having to realize that what we had put in place for programming was gone. This weekend that we're replacing was the one that was, I think, hardest for a lot of us to let go of. That Grieg concerto would have been particularly exceptional, but never fear, we will have Jan Leszecki back to do that piece in a future season. I can't say next year because who knows. Is there a difference between conducting these modern living works and, say, the big classics, the headliners?
Yes and no. In terms of no, it's just it's working on the work, getting to know it very, very well. Using those techniques to do that, and rehearsing it in a way that you would some of the big works. Like, oh, let's phrase it this way, or let's what do you feel about this and this? Of course, all that work putting into it is similar, but the difference is, this is the yes part, is that like I mentioned before, with new music, there are not all the layers of history and tradition that are often on the great works. That can be advantageous, and also not so advantageous in that, those great works, they're great for a reason. That you want to dive into that and discover newer stuff, and maybe bring out something that hasn't been explored before, or at least maybe the audience hasn't heard. But at the same time, there is a weight of that tradition which can cause some conflict amongst the audience or the musicians themselves. But that's always a great work to perform. But with the new music, there's even more to discover. There's always stuff to discover in the old great works as well, but there's even more because it's new, and we get to dive into all of these different things. So there's pros and cons to it all.
I'm conscious of our time, so I'm going to give one last question, and I think this one's asked sort of to both of us. Lessons learned from our first live stream concert. And I am actually going to you and I have talked about this a lot. I don't think we've talked about it at a music talk. But when we've gone for coffee, we talk about remember when we could go for coffee? Sorry, that just hit me. Someday. When we go for coffee, we talked about the fact that live streaming a concert brings out a unique portion of music that you and I have both thought about a lot, in terms of the fact that we have to let go of something that's been ingrained in classical musicians, which it has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be. And the striving for perfection gets you nowhere musically. That's just a reality. Some of the greatest performances I've ever seen, some of the greatest recordings I own, have some wonderful blunders in it. It's not like a recording studio where you get to go, oh, stop, let's do that part again. It's live. And actually, in many ways, directing the live stream cameras last weekend, I feel a lot more like you in your job, because it's orchestrating something that comes out to be interpreted by someone else, and it can't be perfect, and it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. You're exactly right. This is, you mentioned it. There is this thing in classical music, and we're brought up with it, and it's drilled into us. And hopefully that's changing in certain ways, but that's not the purpose of the music. That's not the purpose of art. And so to share an experience that affects people in certain ways is what we're doing. And with a live stream and you're talking about the what we've learned is simply that this affects people in a wonderful way, and not just wonderful, in a way that is can stir up certain feelings, that can stir up a lot of different emotions, and that's the purpose of these experiences. And if we can provide that in a certain way, not only in the live streaming, not only in the concert, but also for all the musicians in rehearsals, in whatever we're doing. This is our life, and it's not a picture perfect, there we have it for it to sit on the shelf. This is a living thing, and that's so important.
It is, and it's important to enjoy that living thing in such a remarkable capacity that we do have right now. I mean, if last year we'd sat here at a music talk and you said to me, Mark, next year we're going to be live streaming everything, I'd be like, no, we're not. And the experience of the hours we spent last week making sure the cameras were working, were being able to connect with the equipment, making sure the mic was in the right place. I mean, Daryl Bickert, who is not only our principal timpanist but our audio technician this year, Daryl moved that mic an inch at a time for a few days there, just to get the right sweet spot in the room for those particular pieces. It may be somewhere else completely different this week. I feel maybe like these experiences of live streaming of smaller concerts, of having to program less than 2 weeks ahead of a concert, might actually be the point, and it might be that we get to live music in a completely new way.
There's a lot of creativity in that, a lot of creativity, and that's why we all got into this in the first place. Creativity. And so there is new elements of creativity that we didn't, like you said, a year ago, didn't even think about.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you to everyone at home who joined us tonight. Thank you to Simeon and Megan, our crew behind the scenes, and to everyone here at McNally Robinson for doing such an incredible job of letting us actually be out in public in a space, which feels so wonderful. Trust me, when it happens again, you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.